When Paul came to Jerusalem, the last time he visited Jerusalem, James pointed out that there were some Jews there that were zealous of the law. These were not Jews trying to establish their own righteousness. It was from a different perspective here. Here's what he said. James said, this is of the law now. Acts 21:20. When they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said, thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe. They were believers, and they are zealous of the law. You say, well, they don't have to keep the law. Well, this was a comely trait here, because everything, God hadn't illuminated everything yet. He was going to, in the process of time, was going to shed light on certain aspects of the law that weren't necessary anymore. But that wasn't done yet at this time. And so they were zealous for the law. Now look, brethren, if they could be zealous for the law, what about zealous for grace? I mean, what about being zealous for grace if they were zealous for the law? They wouldn't allow somebody to encroach or leave a bad taste in their mouth about the law. They were zealous about it. Well, this is how we are about the grace of God, and people would speak unbecomingly of the grace of God and say that it's not sufficient and we're not really saved by grace. So they talk about the election of God and say God doesn't elect anybody, and they talk about this, and this affects us because we're zealous for these things. These things affect us. We want God's glory. Zealous for the law. Paul talked about his own life prior to coming into Christ. He was not a lethargic person, or he'd have never been an apostle. I can tell you that. Right. There's no example in Scripture of a lethargic, indifferent, slothful person who became a prophet or an apostle or a priest. Or it isn't there at all. When Elisha was called, he's a plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. That's what he was doing. He was zealous. Paul said of himself, Acts 22:3, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city being Jerusalem, at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous. See, nobody should ever be asked to work for God that's not zealous. Yeah, right. No person should ever be made an elder or a deacon or a preacher or a Bible college student or anything like that who's not zealous. They are excluded from the whole process. If a person is not serious about God and wholly devoted to Him, they're eliminated from these more public offices. Zealous. I was zealous. Galatians 1:14, he refers to it again. I profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in mine own nation, being more exceedingly zealous for the tradition of my father. So he found out the traditions weren't everything they were cracked up to be, but until he knew that, he was zealous. So I tell you, if I belong to a sectarian church, I won't name any for fear I might name the wrong one, but if I was a member of a church and I wasn't zealous while I was there, what makes anybody think I'll be zealous for God someplace else? Yeah, that's right. I tell you, you want to reach people who have been taught wrong. If they're not zealous about where they're at, you're not really doing anything by bringing them into where you are. Right. This is how God operated. It's how we need to operate too. So yes, I have great regrets about things I was zealous for that I found out they weren't right, but I didn't know it. But see, God looks kindly upon people who are zealous, even though it's for the wrong thing. They at least have this quality of zeal. And God, of course, can turn their heart and change the whole thing like He did with Paul. Again, Philippians 3:6, Paul said, concerning zeal, persecuting the church. So that's how aggressive he was. He went after the people who he thought were breaking the law. And, of course, the Lord apprehended him. Paul said, I want to apprehend that for which I have been apprehended. So Jesus apprehended him while he was engaged in a zealous effort. He apprehended him. Now, we ought to say that zeal without knowledge is not good. Romans 10:2, Paul says of the Jews, I bear record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. But he's willing to work with the situation because they did demonstrate the zeal. See, so that's why. But he'd go to these Jews. They had a zeal, but not according to knowledge. But he'd go to them to direct them more properly. Well, there's a lot of people that have a zeal, but not according to knowledge. There are people like evangelistic zeal, but it's not according to knowledge. But it's something you can, at least it shows you the capacity's there, and so you can turn their hearts. Well, there's some that are zealous for God fasting. They're zealous about fasting. This doesn't mean that you. This is a good quality because it shows their sincerity. Yeah. See, it shows that they're serious about this, zealous about this. So now it's just a matter of redirecting them down the right path. Where if a person is sluggardly and slothful, the first thing you got to wake them up. That's the first thing. You got a dozy type person, so you've got more work to do in a case like that. To my understanding, these are the kind of people that godly leaders should go after. They should go after people who have demonstrated that they're devoted to God, but they're short on understanding. Sometimes it's just because they've never really been exposed, to very much. So if you may work with people like this, and if you were to list on paper, you say, well, I can't agree with that, and I can't agree with this, can't agree with the other. But you sense in your heart, but it's just that they haven't been told. So you capitalize on it by showing them the truth because they've already showed you that if they can see it, they'll take hold of it. And those are the kind of people that should be that you should get. Then they'll get the other people. You don't have to worry about that. And one of the things, he said, they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. There were some people at Corinth that they were zealous for spiritual gifts. They were the first charismatic community. They came behind in no gift, but it really didn't do very much for them. They're one of the worst of all churches in the Bible. So it didn't do a lot for them because they were like toddlers with chainsaws and this sort of That's what it was like. They had a powerful type thing that came behind with no gift, but they didn't know how to use it at all. He had to talk to them about all things love. Had to talk to them about how to use it. So he said to them in 1 Corinthians 14:12, for as much as ye are zealous of spiritual gifts, seek that ye may excel to the edifying of the church. So I see that you're eager, you're zealous, you want to do these things, but so transfer that zeal over to edifying the church. There's places to say that today. Actually say to people, you've got a lot of talent, I see, and why not use it to edify the church? use it for that. Used to be that there was a little more stress placed on that than today. They weren't career centers. See, today, the establishment of a career has kind of upstaged giving things to God. So there's people that have aptitude, and they give it to the engineering society or whatever. They give it to somebody other than God. See, is that wrong? Well, I'm not prepared to say it's wrong, but that's not the right question. The question is it right? That's the question. Is this going to give honor to God? The Corinthians, here's an example of zeal now. The Corinthians had this fornicator in the church. How long it had been there, we don't know. It had been since Paul had left. And he was still going there and is living with his father's wife, and he's still there. And so Paul told him to get rid of him. He didn't say counsel him. He didn't say talk to him. That's not what he said. He said get him out because he's defiling the feast, which is the Lord's table he's talking about. So they did. They delivered him to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. And eventually, the fellow repented. He got out there in the desert, and he was a bit more receptive. But anyway, here's what Paul said about it when he heard that they'd actually acted upon what he told them to do. 1 Corinthians 14:12, even so ye for as much as ye, 2 Corinthians 8:2, he said, I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal, this is a zeal for the offering. Zeal for the offering. When they were zealous for casting out this fornicator, he told them, what zeal